I'm a wonderful baby, I know. You may doubt it, but Mama says so. Crumbs of culture I'm fed. Feel the bumps on my head. A remarkable genius I show. This wonderful baby is now about 120 years old. Baby's illustrated limerick appears in a one-of-a-kind sketchbook, Limericks by H.V.S., authored and illustrated at the turn of the 20th century by Harold van Santvoord, native son of Kinderhook, New York. Fortunately, our artist ignores those remarkable skull bumps so favored by phrenologists of the day, as he portrays what, well, actually appears to be a fairly ordinary infant. It may just be the pose, the tangerine bowl, and the vivid yellow outfit which set this wonderful baby apart from the herd. Or perhaps baby's parents are just a tad biased about their child's talents. In any case, Baby is just one of the wonderful cast of characters you will meet in Van Santvoord's remarkable collection of poems, portraits, and imaginative portrayals. Limericks is a lively and colorful example of amusing folk art. The sketchbook has never been published. There is only one copy in existence. Time and fate have served this unique work very favorably. Though fragile, not a single page of 30-plus illustrated limericks and over a dozen portraits of Kinderhook citizens has suffered the ravages of mold, mildew, or fading. The rediscovery of a long-forgotten gift to the library goes something like this. It was a dark and stormy night. Well, actually it was a dark, dank afternoon, down in the basement storage room of the Kinderhook Memorial Library. Even when there wasn't an inch or so of water on the floor, slimy mold and mildew hadn't done much to improve the overall atmosphere. Dampness had invaded the shelves of the historic collection. Hundreds of moldering volumes no one had ever had the heart or the courage to actually touch and haul to the local landfill. Historic, meaning old, wet, and smelly. A couple of volunteers from the Friends of the Library had cast common sense aside and periodically attempted to rescue a volume here and there. That dark, dank afternoon, they unearthed a barrister case elevated above the flooded floor on cinder blocks. Happily, the glass door of the case had swollen shut, sealing off limericks from the worst that mold can do. The sketchbook had survived down there for about 80 years, undamaged. No exposure to the sun either, no fading. Long story short, Limericks was moved to an acid-free storage box, cleaned, examined by a professional art reproduction firm, and declared to be in remarkably good shape. With the library's blessing, the Friends of the Library set about a fundraising project offering perfect giclée-printed reproductions of Harold van Santvoord's gift.
Limericks by H.V.S. is not just a collection of limericks. Yes, most of the book consists of illustrated limericks. The book is about 45 pages in length, and there are about a dozen pages which are strictly portraits of individuals who lived in or around the village. That's not just an assumption. The village historian Ruth Bawanka has been very generous with her time and research in helping to identify many of these individuals. We are looking at a portrait of Kinderhook at the turn of the 20th century.
We see the various images and stereotypes of minorities, both racial and ethnic minorities that lived in our community, and also some of the interesting people who lived here and are characterized in the body of work. It's important for us to learn about our past, and I can see that the use of the Limericks project will be an educational tool for this generation to realize what life was like 100 years ago and what the attitudes of people were towards different members of society, including minorities. It teaches us humility. It teaches us that the challenge of equality and opportunity has been a long time in coming. It also teaches us that we can learn from mistakes. We can learn from the mistakes of our forebears, who may have not been the most educated or liberal in their attitudes towards others, especially minorities. it's important that we know that. It fills in part of our history that we may not fully appreciate in the 21st century. And it also tells us the good old days weren't the good old days for everyone. There was a lot of struggle. There was a lot of challenges that 100 years ago, people living in Kinderhook had to endure and to work through. But we're probably typical of rural America circa 1900, and for that I think it has a very broad audience. And for that, we consider it a very important piece of work.
So, about the man. Who knew that Life magazine was around as early as 1883? Obviously, Harold van Santvoord did. In that year, at age 29, he published his best-known work, Half Holidays, Elysian Dreams and Sober Realities, while also starting a career as a regular contributor to Life. And from 1908 until his death, he was a member of the editorial staff of the Albany Times-Union. Not a bad run for a writer who had started his career at age 15, submitting pieces for a New York City comic weekly. A turn-of-the-century profile in the Magazine of Poetry notes that H.V.S. finds time in the seclusion of his home for congenial literary work. We can't be certain that the cigarette-smoking gentleman in this limerick represents a self-portrait, but the penciled note says it's so. As to van Santvoord's artistic bent, we can but speculate. A reasonable guess is that Limericks was produced for his own entertainment. A history of Kinderhook, written in the day, observes, he himself was an artist facile in the use of his pencil. And the same entry concludes, in the morning of January 8th, 1913, he was found dead, sitting in his chair and with paper and pipe in hand. Harold van Santvoord's talent lives on. Our local artist, comfortable working from the seclusion of his home in a tiny upstate New York village 100-plus years ago, would, in all likelihood, be stunned to find his sketchbook limericks reproduced in dramatic and large giclée fine art print, and exhibited in a world-class art gallery. Jack Shainman's The School is, indeed, a repurposed school located in the heart of Kinderhook. Mr. Shainman, a nationally and internationally acclaimed gallerist, offered his take on limericks, found the images in sync with the theme of his show, Winter in America, and generously allotted gallery space for a sampling of van Santvoord's work. In keeping with the themes of this show, Mr. Shainman selected images, limericks, that often reflect racial and gender stereotypes prevalent at the turn of the 20th century. In these particular pieces, van Santvoord proves himself to be a man of his times. The Friends of the Library in no way endorse or approve these stereotypes. We do, however, offer them as representative of their historical and social context.
The Harold van Santvoord prints were chosen to be in this exhibition because they offer insight into views held about race and social class 100 years ago. The prints provide perspective for contemporary works dealing with racial identity and allow visitors to ponder how far we've come.
All of Harold van Santvoord's limericks are clever and amusing. Many also pack a sly political, social, or philosophical punch. Enhanced by vivid watercolor technique, the pen and ink rendition of Weary Waggles portrays the Kinderhook village drunk in torn pants, battered hat, and ragged jacket, relaxing on what appears to be the banks of Kinderhook Creek. Weary Waggles is a scruffy sort, no doubt about that, but he also has a philosophical bent, shown in the limerick that accompanies the drawing. Listen in, as Weary Waggles offers some surprisingly astute wisdom on what brings ruination to them captains of wealth. In vino veritas. Weary Waggles, though down on his uppers, fills himself up with booze to the scuppers. What breaks down the health of them captains of wealth is not dope, but hard work and late suppers. Van Santvoord's sketchbook also provides some drawings that are simply portraits of local people without limericks. One of our favorite portraits is called Thomas de Vriest attending a funeral. Mr. de Vriest is a bit of a mystery. No cemetery records, census data, or genealogical surveys contain his name. Even without official records, however, we can guess that de Vriest was part of the thriving African-American community that existed in the village at the turn of the 20th century and beyond. We do know that the Bethel AME Church held worship services into the mid-1900s. The church still stands, now as a private residence on Sunset Avenue. We might further guess that, if the funeral Thomas de Vriest attended was for one of his African-American brethren, that person was likely to have been buried in the ground set aside for the graves of persons of color. The Persons of Color graveyard is located inside the boundaries of Rothermel Park, where some headstones are still legible. In stark turn-of-the-century mourning garb, Mr. Thomas de Vriest lives today in this dignified ink drawing. Look closely for a mourning armband, sharply contrasted to two lively splashes of red, one perhaps unintended for public display. And while we're looking at a sampling of Van Santvoord's characters, here comes Maud.
Here comes Maud for her cool morning dip. Watch the men on the beach, how they skip. When her charms they discover, she may capture a lover, but declares she'd as soon catch the grip.
Maud's determined visage may well prove Freud's observation that sometimes a morning dip is just a morning dip. Now that you've met some of Harold Van Santvoord's fascinating cast of characters, you know that you'd like to see, hear, read, and learn more about the man, his art, and his hometown. And of course, you would like to own a piece of Van Santvoord's artwork. Here's how to do that. Giclée fine art prints from Limericks by H.V.S. are available for purchase. The Friends of the Kinderhook Memorial Library have selected 25 original works for digital reproduction. They have been computer scanned and printed using high-quality inks and paper. Prints can be ordered in any size. Prices and shipping information for these Giclée prints are available through the Kinderhook Folk Art Project, a fundraising initiative of the Friends. Revenue realized from the sale of H.V.S. reproductions will be used to support programs of the library. The Kinderhook Folk Art Project can be reached via the library at 518-758-6192. And please, come visit the historic village of Kinderhook in New York's Hudson Valley. While you're here, visit the Kinderhook Memorial Library, where the original copy of Limericks resides. Visit Jack Shainman's fabulous art gallery, The School, where pieces of Van Santvoord's work have been displayed. And if you happen to be here on an appropriately dark and stormy night, or a dark, dank afternoon, you might want to take full advantage of the local atmosphere and pay a visit to the Kinderhook Rural Cemetery, where you'll find Harold Van Santvoord's grave, along with the gravesite of another great son of Kinderhook, Martin Van Buren, 8th President of the United States. Stop for a moment and give a tip of your hat to the man whose work memorializes and celebrates a past era, bringing life to a whole array of folks who once walked our village streets and called it home. And then keep exploring. As the discovery of Harold Van Santvoord's amazing book proves, here in Kinderhook, you never know what you might find.